The dueling arena on Station Viral burned bright with 1,000 lights. Shining banners of alien houses hung from the tall metal walls, each bearing colors and emblems from worlds far across the stars. The air shimmered faintly with energy fields, keeping the oxygen levels right for every species. And in the middle of it all stood a single round platform where warriors tested their skill in front of the whole academy. It was the last day of the term, the final duel. Cadets from 50 different planets crowded the stands. They clicked, chirped, rumbled, or buzzed in their own ways, talking excitedly about the coming matches. For most, it was just sport, a show of power and grace with their glowing energy sabers. The blades of plasma bent and shimmered safely, set to training mode. They could sting but not kill. The Academy rules made sure of that. Everyone knew this was just practice, no real danger. Everyone except the human boy. Eli Varon of Earth stood at the edge of the platform, quiet, holding a long black case in both hands. His training uniform was plain, the gray fabric damp with nervous sweat. Around him, alien cadets towered like giants, scaled, furred, armored. Their laughter filled the air as they noticed him. "Look, it's the Terran," one Drek said, his thick tail curling with amusement. "Does he even have bones strong enough for this?" A group of Vian cadets, a reptilian species with 4 arms and long spines along their backs, laughed openly. "He should stick to reading books," one said. "Humans are soft, you'd snap in half if I sneezed." Eli didn't answer. He just looked down at the case. His heart thumped hard against his ribs like a drumbeat of fear and pride mixed together. He thought of home, of his uncle's forge on the dusty outskirts of old New Virginia under Earth's blue sky. The smell of metal and fire. The sound of hammer on steel. The words his uncle had told him the day he left for the academy. "They'll have their beams and fields and shiny toys. But this blade is ours, it's real. It remembers blood and courage, don't forget that." The memory steadied him. He lifted his chin and stepped onto the platform. The crowd grew quiet. Even the instructor, Commander Zylek, a tall insectoid with crystal-like eyes, tilted his head curiously as Eli set down the case and opened it. Inside, wrapped in worn cloth, was a sword. A true sword. No hum of energy, no safety circuits, just a long, silver blade, sharp and honest. The light from above danced across it, casting soft reflections on the polished steel. The sound it made when Eli drew it was pure, metal against leather. A sound no one in the room had ever heard before. The silence broke. "Is that steel?" someone muttered. "Primitive junk," another scoffed. "Why bring that here?" Commander Zylek raised one clawed hand. "Cadet Varon," he said, his voice calm but heavy, "that weapon lacks any regulation dampener. It is fully lethal." Eli nodded once. "Yes, Commander." "You understand that training weapons are required for safety?" "I do," Eli said, "but this isn't a weapon for training." He looked at the blade, then at the alien commander. "This is a weapon for fighting." Murmurs rippled through the stands. A few laughed again, nervous this time. Zylek's antennae twitched. "And you believe this primitive tool will serve you against energy arms?" Eli gripped the hilt tighter. "I don't need it to serve me, I need it to be mine." The commander studied him for a long moment, his many eyes reflecting the human's steady gaze. Then he gave a slow, clicking nod. "Very well, the rules permit custom equipment at your own risk. Do you accept full responsibility?" Eli swallowed hard. "I do." "Then let the match proceed. Opponent, Cadet Relthar of Vian." The crowd erupted in approval. Relthar stood from the benches, towering over everyone, his scales dark green and shimmering like armor plates. 2 curved energy sabers hung at his sides. When he stepped forward, the floor panels trembled under his weight. He looked down at Eli and grinned, revealing a mouth full of sharp white teeth. "Human," he rumbled, "you have courage, I'll grant that, but you will regret this choice." Eli met his gaze, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Maybe," he said quietly, "maybe not." Relthar ignited both sabers, twin blades of blue plasma humming like hornets. The crowd cheered, the sound echoing through the metal walls. Eli's sword stayed silent in his hands, the air around it still and heavy. When the starting bell rang, Eli didn't move. He just watched. The alien circled him, his movements confident, showy, his twin sabers tracing arcs of light. Eli shifted his feet, remembering every hour spent in the forge yard back home, swinging that same blade until his arms burned. His uncle had told him that steel teaches patience, that it never lies. The other cadets didn't understand. To them, the sword was old, useless, dead. But Eli knew better. Steel had memory. It carried every hand that had held it, every fight it had survived. It was a story that had never ended. The human raised his sword, its point angled toward the glowing floor, and whispered under his breath, "Let's write a new chapter." Somewhere deep inside him, the fear melted away. Now there was only the blade. Only the challenge. Only the fire of every human who had ever stood small before giants and refused to kneel. The match was about to begin. And for the first time in 1,000 years, true steel was about to sing again among the stars. The platform lights dimmed, and a cold blue glow filled the air as the shields rose around the dueling ring. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. A human against a Vian was rare enough, but a human using a metal blade, that was something no one had ever seen. Commander Xylek's voice boomed through the arena. "Combatants ready." Eli lifted his sword in both hands, the tip steady though his heart was not. "Ready." Relthar raised his twin energy sabers, their blue plasma humming like living things. "Let's end this quickly." The bell rang. Relthar moved first, fast as lightning. 4 arms, 4 strikes, each slash glowing bright, each one carrying enough power to cut through metal walls. The crowd gasped as Eli barely dodged, the plasma trails lighting his face. He stumbled back, his boots sliding on the polished floor. The heat from the sabers scorched the air in front of him. His sword, cold and solid, looked small against that storm of light. "Come now, human," Relthar roared. "Fight." Eli's mind raced. His muscles trembled, but his training kicked in, his uncle's voice echoing through memory. "Don't meet strength with strength. Meet it with rhythm. Find the breath between blows and strike there." The Vian swung again, both sabers crossing down like falling stars. Eli turned his sword sideways, catching one saber on the flat of the blade and letting the other pass by. Sparks burst where energy met steel, but the sword held. The crowd gasped louder. Relthar blinked in disbelief. "What, how?" Eli pushed forward, twisting his wrists. The sword slid down the saber's length and struck the Vian's wrist guard, throwing his aim wide. Then Eli stepped back, breathing hard. The aliens in the stands began to murmur. Their eyes glowed in the dark as they whispered in confusion. Steel should have melted on contact with plasma, but the human blade, somehow, endured. Eli didn't know why either. Maybe it was the alloy, maybe luck, or maybe the years of hammering and folding that his uncle had poured into the blade. But it was holding, and that was all that mattered. Relthar snarled, his pride wounded. "Enough playing." He came again, faster, his sabers spinning in a deadly dance. Eli blocked the first, ducked the second, and rolled away as the third strike split the air where his head had been. The hum of energy filled his ears. His lungs burned. Sweat ran down his neck. Every time Eli looked up, Relthar seemed taller, stronger, endless. But somewhere deep inside, Eli felt something shift. He could see it now, the small pauses between each swing, the overreach of the alien's longer arms. "The pattern. Every opponent has rhythm," his uncle had said. "Break it and they break too." Eli exhaled slowly, centering his weight. The next time Relthar lunged, he didn't retreat. He stepped in. The move was madness. The crowd shouted in alarm. But Eli's sword met one saber and shoved it wide. He turned, catching the other under the crossguard, and levered it up. The plasma hissed across the steel, but Eli's momentum carried through. His shoulder slammed into Relthar's chest, and the alien staggered back, surprise flashing in his yellow eyes. Eli followed, swinging low. The blade bit against Relthar's thigh, drawing a shallow, smoking line, not deep enough to wound seriously, but deep enough to hurt. The Vian's roar shook the air. Eli backed up, sword raised again, his arms shaking. He could smell the heat of burned scales. His breathing came in ragged bursts, but his eyes stayed locked on his opponent. Around the ring, the laughter had stopped. The aliens weren't mocking anymore. They were watching. Even Commander Xylek leaned forward slightly, his crystalline eyes glowing faintly. Relthar's fury filled the air like static. He lifted both sabers high, energy flaring brighter, turning blue to white. "You dare draw blood from me, Terran?" Eli didn't answer. His grip was tight, knuckles white. His chest rose and fell with each breath. The world narrowed to the blade in his hand and the space between heartbeats. The next strike came with terrifying speed. The sabers crossed, their energy poolsing in unison. Eli met them head-on, metal to light, heat to strength. The clash blinded him for an instant. Sparks rained. The sword screamed under the strain. But Eli didn't back down. He twisted his hips, sliding one foot forward, and shoved with everything he had. For a heartbeat, the blades locked. Then Relthar slipped. Eli used the opening, pivoting to the side, and slammed the pommel of his sword into the alien's chest. The hit landed solidly, knocking the wind from him. Relthar stumbled. The crowd went wild. Eli stepped back, gasping, the sword trembling in his hands. He couldn't feel his fingers. The weapon felt heavier than ever, but it was still his, still alive. He looked up through the haze of light, his voice low but steady. "You fight with power," he said, "but you don't fight with heart." Relthar bared his teeth. "You think that will save you, human?" Eli smiled faintly, even through the exhaustion. "It already has." The Vian roared again, louder this time, and charged. Eli braced himself, sword raised, feet grounded. He could feel the old forge in his blood, the rhythm of hammer and fire. The sound of his uncle's voice whispering that steel only breaks when the heart behind it falters. His didn't. The blades met again, and the ring filled with light. Eli moved through it, tired, scared, and alive, every strike of his sword carrying the weight of Earth itself. He was smaller, slower, and outmatched, but in that moment the galaxy saw what it meant to be human. He didn't fight to win. He fought because he would not yield. And that made all the difference. The air in the arena trembled with energy. The crowd leaned so far forward that even the guards stepped closer to the safety rail. The blue glow of Relthar's twin sabers lit his scaled face like firelight, reflecting in his golden eyes. He was angry now, beyond reason, beyond pride. Eli could feel the heat from the sabers against his skin. The air smelled like burning ozone and metal. His lungs burned with each breath, his arms heavy from the weight of the longsword. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, sweat running down his neck, but he stood tall. Relthar's voice rumbled like thunder. "You have spirit, human, but spirit cannot stop this." He raised both sabers high, and the energy crackled louder. The crowd cheered for him, louder, faster, chanting his name. He was one of the best duelists in the academy, a born warrior of the Vian. The idea that a fragile, thin-boned human had lasted this long was already unthinkable. Eli heard the cheers for the alien, the disbelief in every whisper. But somewhere in that noise, he heard something else, the echo of his uncle's hammer striking steel. The memory calmed him. It reminded him who he was and what he fought for. "You don't need to be the strongest," his uncle had said. "Just be the one who refuses to fall." Relthar charged. The Vian's movements blurred, a storm of motion. The first saber swung low, the second came down from above. Eli stepped aside, sparks flying as his blade caught the lower strike. The top saber missed by inches, scorching the air past his cheek. Eli countered, fast and clean, a thrust to the midsection. Relthar blocked it with one saber, sparks bursting in bright arcs. For a heartbeat, the two locked eyes, alien gold and human gray. Then Relthar roared, spinning his body, using all four arms in a whirlwind of glowing blades. The air hissed. Eli ducked the first swing, blocked the second, parried the third, but the fourth hit his sword dead center. Clang! The shock rattled his bones. The steel vibrated, ringing like a bell. The force knocked him backward. He almost fell but caught himself, dragging the sword into a low guard stance. His arms ached. His palms burned where the grip tore at his skin, but his eyes stayed sharp. Relthar's grin was wide and cruel. "You can't keep up forever, Terran." Eli's breath came heavy, but his voice was calm. "I don't need forever." He stepped forward again. The alien laughed, swinging again, confident. But Eli wasn't where he expected him to be. The human ducked low, rolling under the saber, and came up inside Relthar's reach. The crowd gasped. Eli's sword flashed in the light, one clean stroke. The steel edge slid across the outer armor of Relthar's forearm, cutting through the thin plating. A line of green blood appeared, sizzling where it met the hot air. The Vian howled, more in anger than pain. The noise echoed off the walls, deep and furious. Commander Xylek's mandibles twitched in surprise. "Remarkable," he whispered under his breath. Eli backed away, breathing fast. His sword was warm now, the edges faintly glowing from the heat of the plasma it had touched. The smell of scorched metal filled his nose, but his heart was steady. He began to see the rhythm clearly. Relthar was strong, but every strike came from habit, not from thought. He was fast, but predictable. He relied on his power, not his mind. Eli changed his stance, feet closer, sword angled across his chest. The old Earth style, not the one the Academy taught. A stance for fighters who couldn't afford mistakes. The alien lunged again, shouting in fury. Eli stepped to the side, turning the blade just enough. The saber slid down his steel and off the guard. Eli twisted, slammed his pommel into Relthar's ribs, and rolled away before the alien could recover. The crowd erupted. "Did you see that?" a Drex cadet shouted. "He used the parry." Relthar growled, his breath sharp and ragged. "Enough tricks." But the human had found his rhythm now. He wasn't just surviving, he was learning. Every attack the Vian made taught him something new, how the alien balanced his weight when his extra arms slowed him down where his scales left small gaps. Eli adjusted, step by step, swing by swing, until his movements began to flow. The sword was an extension of his arm, the way it had always been in the forge yard. He remembered the fire, the sound, the patience. And in that memory, he found strength. The next exchange was faster than the crowd could follow. The alien struck high, Eli blocked. The alien swung low, Eli deflected. Then Eli spun, drawing the sword across the air and catching one of Relthar's sabers just above the hilt. With a twist and a shout, he wrenched it free. The saber clattered across the arena floor, its blue light dimming as it slid to a stop. The crowd went silent. Relthar's expression froze. Eli stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face, the steel sword humming faintly from heat. "One down," he said softly. For the first time, the Vian didn't speak. His breathing was rough, his eyes wild. He reignited the other saber and charged again, swinging with raw fury. But the rage made him sloppy. Eli sidestepped the swing, parried the follow-up, and slammed his knee into the alien's chest. Relthar stumbled. The sword came up, the edge gleaming in the blue light. Eli didn't strike. He stopped, blade inches from the alien's throat. The crowd held its breath. Relthar froze, eyes wide. Eli spoke, voice steady and cold. "Yield." The alien hissed, but his arms dropped. The saber dimmed. Commander Zylek raised one claw high. "Match pause. Human cadet Eli Varen holds advantage." The audience erupted, cheers, disbelief, even applause. Eli lowered his sword, exhaling slowly. His whole body shook from exhaustion, but inside, something burned brighter than ever. He wasn't supposed to last a minute. He wasn't supposed to matter. But the moment his steel met plasma, he had done the impossible. He'd shown them that humanity, small, fragile, unenhanced, could still fight like fire itself. For a few heartbeats, the entire arena was silent. Eli stood there in the blue light, his sword lowered but steady, his chest rising and falling like a forge bellows. The tip of the steel blade glowed faintly orange from heat, but it was unbroken. Around him, the crowd of cadets sat frozen, their alien eyes wide with disbelief. The human had disarmed one of the best duelists in the Academy. Commander Zylek's many eyes blinked in slow astonishment. "Continue," he said finally, his voice echoing through the hall. "Combat resumes." Eli's stomach twisted. He was tired, so tired he could barely keep his arms up. His hands were blistered from the hilt, his shoulders burned, and his breathing was sharp and uneven. But something deep inside him refused to stop. He'd come this far, he couldn't fall now. Relthar bent down, grabbing his remaining saber. His claws flexed, his scales rippling in anger. The Vian's breathing came fast and heavy, and his golden eyes burned like molten metal. He wasn't calm anymore. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to hurt. "You shame me before the whole Academy," Relthar snarled. "You will bleed for this, human." Eli lifted his sword again. His arms trembled, but his grip was sure. "Then come and try." The crowd gasped at his words, such arrogance from a fragile species. But to Eli it wasn't arrogance, it was focus, it was fire. Relthar attacked. The alien's saber screamed through the air, brighter and hotter than before. Eli blocked once, twice, but the third blow knocked him backward, the steel shrieking under the force. His boots scraped against the platform as he barely kept his balance. The fourth strike hit his sword dead center. The sound echoed like thunder. Eli's knees buckled. Pain shot up his arms. The sword quivered in his hands. Relthar pressed forward, eyes wild. "You think your scrap of metal can stand against my kind?" Eli gritted his teeth. "It already has." But inside, he knew he couldn't hold this much longer. Each impact made his vision blur. The Vian was too strong, too fast, too furious. Then came the blow that shattered the tip of the sword. The sound cut through the arena like glass breaking. The top few inches of steel flew off and clattered across the floor, glowing dull red. Eli stared down at the jagged edge. His weapon, his uncle's blade, was broken. For a moment, all he could do was stare. The world felt distant, muffled, like he was underwater. The crowd murmured in pity. A few aliens shook their heads. The fragile human's miracle had ended. Relthar's laughter was deep and cruel. "And now," he said, raising his saber for the final blow, "your story ends." Eli looked up, sweat dripping into his eyes. His lungs burned, his body screamed, but something inside him refused to quit. His uncle's words came back to him, soft and steady as the ring of a hammer. "The weapon isn't the steel, Eli. The weapon is the one who holds it." Eli's fingers tightened around the ruined sword. When Relthar swung down, Eli didn't block, he moved. He stepped inside the attack, where the saber's energy couldn't cut him, and drove forward with his shoulder. The plasma hissed just above his back, close enough to sear his uniform. The crowd gasped. Eli twisted his body, grabbing Relthar's forearm with both hands. He'd spent years watching the Vian duelists, learning their strengths and weaknesses. Their extra arms made them fast, but it also meant their balance was easy to break, if you knew where to push. He stepped back, twisted hard, and used the alien's own momentum against him. The sound of the throw was like thunder. Relthar's massive body hit the floor of the arena with a crash that shook the air. Eli followed through, landing in a low crouch, his broken sword pressed against the alien's scaled throat. "Yield," Eli said, his voice rough but calm. Relthar struggled, his claws scraping the floor. "Never." Eli pressed the blunt edge of the broken blade harder, right under the alien's chin. "You lost your weapon," he said softly. "You lost your balance. Don't lose your honor, too." The Vian froze. For a long, terrible second, neither of them moved. Then Relthar's shoulders sagged, and the hum of his saber faded to silence. "I yield," he said quietly. The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, and disbelief filled the arena. Some species roared, some hissed, others simply stared. They had watched a human, a soft, unevolved creature from a backwater world, defeat a four-armed duelist from a warrior race. Commander Zylek raised one clawed hand, his voice amplified across the chamber. "Victory, Cadet Eli Varon of Earth." The sound of his name rolled like thunder through the arena. Eli lowered his sword and sank to one knee, too exhausted to stand. His arms hung limp, his chest ached, and his breath came in short, painful gasps. The broken sword lay across his lap, glowing faintly with the heat of battle. He looked down at the ruined steel and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't to the weapon, it was to what it stood for. To every hour of work his uncle had poured into it. To the fire, the struggle, the stubborn heart that refused to stop. Commander Zylek approached, his long legs moving with insect precision. He studied the human quietly for a moment. "Tell me," he said at last, "why did you not choose a proper weapon?" Eli lifted his head, his gray eyes tired but steady. "Because this one tells the truth," he said. "Steel doesn't lie, it doesn't pretend, it breaks if you're weak and it endures if you're strong. I needed to know which one I was." The commander stared for a long moment before giving a slow, clicking nod. "Then you have your answer." As the crowd continued to cheer, Eli stood shakily, the broken sword still in his hand. It was no longer perfect, no longer sharp, but in that moment it was more than a weapon. It was proof. Proof that courage could bridge any gap. Proof that heart could match technology. Proof that even in a galaxy full of power and pride, humanity still had something the others did not. The will to fight until the last spark of strength was gone. When the noise of the crowd finally faded, Eli could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heartbeat. It thundered in his ears, echoing like war drums. His hands ached, his shoulders screamed, and the weight of his broken sword felt like a mountain in his grip. He had won the first round, but victory had a cruel price. His arms trembled, his knees shook, and each breath tore at his chest like fire. He had nothing left to give, but Relthar wasn't finished. The Vian duelist rose from the ground, growling low and deep, the sound vibrating through the metal floor. The green blood that leaked from his arm only made him angrier. "You think this is over, human?" he hissed. "You think you've won." The words hit the air like venom. Eli didn't answer. He couldn't. His mouth was too dry, his throat too tight. But he didn't lower his weapon either. The jagged edge of the longsword caught the arena lights and gleamed faintly, like a wounded star refusing to die. The crowd fell quiet again. They could sense it. The match wasn't finished. Something inside Relthar had snapped. The alien's pride, his fury, his need to prove superiority had burned away every rule, every ounce of reason. Commander Xylek leaned forward, sensing the danger. "Relthar, the match has been decided. The duel is over." But the Vian didn't move. His breathing came in deep, violent bursts. The veins in his arms glowed faintly with bioenergy as he reignited both sabers, their plasma burning white-hot this time. "This is no duel anymore," Relthar growled. "This is vengeance." The commander shouted a warning, but it was too late. Relthar attacked. The sabers cut through the air in blazing arcs. The protective field around the arena flickered from the heat. Eli barely managed to raise his sword in time. Steel met light, again and again, each impact sending waves of heat and pain up his arms. The broken edge glowed red now, too hot to touch. Sparks flew as the plasma bit into the metal, carving tiny scars into the blade. Eli stepped back, once, twice, until his heel hit the edge of the platform. Behind him was nothing but a drop and energy shielding. He couldn't retreat any further. Relthar smiled, fangs flashing. "Nowhere left to run, little Terran." Eli's vision blurred from exhaustion. His lungs begged for air. But deep inside, that same stubborn spark still burned. He thought of his uncle's forge, of the flames that never stopped burning even when the night was cold. He whispered the words his uncle had told him 100 times. "Steel remembers the hands that made it. Fight with heart and it will fight with you." Relthar swung high, both sabers crossing in a glowing X meant to end it once and for all. Eli ducked low, sparks raining around him, and thrust upward with every ounce of strength left in his body. The jagged tip of the broken sword struck Relthar's wrist. The alien roared, his grip faltering. One saber flew from his hand, spinning through the air. Eli didn't stop. He pivoted using his smaller size, his speed, his will. He drove forward, pushing the flat of his sword against Relthar's chest, forcing the giant back a step. Then another. The Vian stumbled, snarling, his tail whipping across the floor for balance. The human's strength was gone, but something else moved him now. Not power, not rage, just will. Every muscle in his body screamed, every nerve burned, but still he pushed. The crowd shouted, their voices rising with every heartbeat. "Stop this," Commander Xylek cried. "Enough." But Eli couldn't hear him anymore. The world had narrowed to one simple truth. If he stopped now, it would all be for nothing. Relthar swung again in desperation, slashing across Eli's arm. The heat tore through fabric and skin, leaving a searing mark, but the human didn't flinch. He used the pain. He turned it. With a shout that came from somewhere deep in his soul, Eli twisted the sword, hooked it under Relthar's remaining saber, and ripped it free. The weapon flew across the floor and crashed against the wall, its light flickering out. Relthar's forearms hung useless in shock. His chest heaved, his breath coming fast and uneven. Eli staggered forward, the broken sword raised one last time. The steel trembled in his hands but didn't fall. He pressed the flat of the blade to the alien's neck. "Yield," he said again, voice rough, low, and unshakable. Relthar's golden eyes met his, and for the first time there was no fury there. Only disbelief, only respect. The silence stretched. Then slowly the Vian nodded. "I yield." The crowd exploded with noise, roars, whistles, cheers in 100 alien tongues. Some shouted in disbelief, others in awe. A few even stood, raising their fists to the air. Commander Xylek's voice cut through it all. "Victory remains with Cadet Eli Varon of Earth." The shields dropped, the lights brightened, and Eli's knees gave out. He fell to the floor, catching himself with one hand, the broken sword clattering beside him. He was shaking all over, half from exhaustion, half from something else. He looked at the weapon lying next to him. The steel was scarred, its edge chipped and glowing dull orange. It was ruined now. But to Eli, it had never looked more beautiful. The blade had done what no alloy, no plasma, no machine could. It had carried him through the impossible. He whispered softly, barely audible over the cheers, "We did it." His voice cracked, but he smiled. Commander Zylek approached, his crystalline eyes glimmering in the light. "Human," he said slowly, "you are reckless beyond measure, but perhaps braver than any of us." Eli didn't know what to say. His vision blurred. The pain in his arm throbbed, but his heart felt full, so full it could break. As medics hurried forward, Eli looked once more at the crowd, at the alien faces that now looked at him not with laughter, but with wonder. For the first time, humanity wasn't just a story of weakness or chaos. It was something else entirely. A spark. A defiance. A promise. Even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, steel still sang, and humans still refused to bow. The medics tried to lead Eli off the platform, but he refused to let go of the sword. His hands were shaking, the knuckles white from gripping the hilt so tightly that his skin split in small cuts. The metal was still warm against his palms, and part of him feared that if he let go, everything, the fight, the victory, the proof, would vanish like smoke. Commander Zylek stepped closer, his insected frame towering above the human boy. His many eyes glittered beneath the arena lights as he studied the trembling figure. "Cadet Varen," he said slowly, "the match is over. You may rest." Eli lifted his head. His breathing was shallow, his hair damp with sweat. "I'm all right," he whispered. "You are not," the commander replied, his tone strangely gentle. "But perhaps that is what makes you human." The crowd was still roaring, chanting, and clicking in their various tongues. Many of the cadets had never seen a human before, and none had ever seen one win. They weren't cheering for power. They were cheering for something older. Something that reached beyond the rules of the academy and into the part of every heart that understood what it meant to fight for your life and not give up. Eli glanced toward Relthar. The massive Vian stood at the far edge of the arena, his chest rising and falling heavily. His sabers were gone, his arms limp, but his golden eyes were steady now. The fury had burned away. He stepped forward, each motion careful, deliberate, until he stood just a few feet from Eli. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Relthar placed one clawed hand over his chest, the Vian sign of respect. "You fought with honor, human," he said quietly. "You fought like a flame that refuses to die." Eli blinked in surprise. The alien's voice held no anger, no sarcasm, only truth. He nodded weakly. "You fought harder," Eli said, his voice rough. "I just held on longer." Relthar's mouth curved into something close to a smile. "And that, Terran, is why you won." The crowd erupted again as the two bowed to each other. In that simple motion, something ancient and sacred passed between them, respect born not from words, but from battle. When Eli finally left the ring, the medics guided him toward the medical bay. He limped slightly, one arm pressed against his ribs, but he held the broken sword close to his chest. The heat of the metal was fatting, leaving it cool and solid once more. As they passed through the halls of the academy, cadets from different worlds stared at him. Some gave cautious nods, others whispered as he passed. A few reached out to touch the edge of the blade, as though trying to understand what kind of courage could come from something so old, so simple. Inside the med bay, the air smelled of sterilized mist and faint electricity. A medic drone scanned him and beeped disapprovingly. "Fractured ulna, burn damage on the right forearm, severe exhaustion, recommend 2 days rest." Eli chuckled weakly. "Make it 1." He sat quietly while the machines patched him up. His arm throbbed, but he barely felt it. His mind was still back in the arena, the ringing sound of steel, the heat of plasma, the weight of fear and defiance. He remembered the moment when the sword broke, the spark, the sound, the flash of light, and how somehow he hadn't stopped fighting. That moment lived inside him now like a brand. When he finally lay back on the bed, he set the sword beside him. The blade was ugly now, jagged and scarred, but to him it was beautiful. It carried every strike, every bruise, every heartbeat of that fight. It was no longer his uncle's weapon. It was his. He ran a hand gently over the steel and whispered, "You did good." Outside the med bay, the world changed. Word spread faster than light. By the next morning, every student in the academy had seen the footage. The human who fought with a sword of steel. The human who stood against plasma and fury and won. They replayed the moment again and again. The parries, the throws, the final stand. Some said it was luck. Others said it was madness. But deep down, most understood it was heart. When Eli returned to the training hall a few days later, the stares were different. They were no longer mocking. They were curious, respectful, even cautious. As he stepped onto the floor, Relthar was waiting. The Vian bowed low. "I have requested you as my sparring partner," he said, "if you will accept." Eli blinked, then smiled faintly. "I'll need a new sword." Relthar chuckled. "I hear the Academy smiths are already making one under your uncle's design." Eli's chest tightened with emotion. "Really?" "Yes," Relthar said. "They say the galaxy has much to learn from old Earth steel." Eli looked down at his hand, the faint scars, the bruises, then at the jagged blade hanging at his side. "Not from the steel," he said softly, "from the people who made it." Commander Zylek watched from above, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. He turned to his assistant and said, "Record this duel in the Academy archives. Title, The Vian and the Human." "What should we mark as the outcome, Commander?" The old insectoid's eyes glittered. "Outcome?" he repeated. "No, mark it as a lesson." That night, as the stars turned outside the great windows of the station, Eli sat alone in the observation dome. The sword lay across his knees, its surface reflecting the light of distant suns. He thought about home, about the forge, the hammer, the simple fire that had birthed this blade. He imagined his uncle laughing when he told him what had happened. In the quiet hum of the station, Eli whispered to the stars, "We're small, we're fragile, but we don't stop." His reflection in the glass looked tired but proud, a faint smile curving his lips. He tightened his hand around the broken sword. It didn't hum with energy or glow with light. It was silent, yet somehow it sang to him louder than ever. And across the galaxy, for the first time in a long time, the other species began to whisper a new story about humankind. Not of weakness, not of fear, but of a people who carried courage in their bones and steel in their hearts. A people who could face the impossible and still rise again. Weeks passed since the duel, but the memory of it refused to fade. Across the academy, cadets whispered the name Eli Varen with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The video of the fight, grainy and raw, circulated faster than any official broadcast. They watched the way he stood against fire, how he moved with exhaustion in his bones but defiance in his eyes. It wasn't the victory that made the story spread, it was the heart. On the training decks, young soldiers from worlds stronger and richer than Earth began to repeat one quiet phrase. "Fight like the human." Eli didn't feel like a legend. Most days his body still ached. His ribs were wrapped, his arm bandaged, and his sleep came fitfully. The duel had left marks deeper than any scar, burns on his skin, yes, but also a heat that lived in his chest, a strange mix of pride and disbelief. He spent his evenings in the forge, the same small metal workshop where weapons were repaired. The air there reminded him of home, the smell of oil and smoke, the steady rhythm of hammer against anvil. On the table beside him lay the broken sword, his sword. The blade was cracked halfway through, the tip gone, its surface scarred with burns and plasma streaks. Yet when he touched it, it still felt alive. He remembered the forge on Earth, his uncle's strong hands guiding his own, sparks dancing like stars around them. "A sword is only as strong as the one who wields it," his uncle had said. "But the one who wields it must also have something worth fighting for." Back then, Eli hadn't known what that meant. He did now. The Academy honored him with a small ceremony, a rare thing for a cadet, rarer still for a human. The hall was filled with every species, their banners and insignias gleaming under the bright light. Commander Zylek presided, his crystal-like eyes fixed on Eli. When the human stepped onto the stage, the applause was hesitant at first, scattered. But then it grew, louder, steadier, echoing through the room like thunder. Even Relthar stood in the front row, his arms crossed, a quiet smile on his scaled face. Commander Zylek's voice cut through the noise. "Cadet Eli Varen of Earth," he began, "you entered this academy as an unknown, armed with a weapon no one believed could stand against the future. You fought without fear, without augmentation, without armor. You fought as yourself, and in doing so you reminded this academy what courage truly is." He gestured to the broken sword displayed on a stand beside Eli. "This weapon has been examined by our engineers. They cannot explain why it endured plasma, why it resisted heat that should have melted it. Perhaps they say it was the alloy. Perhaps they say it was the craftsmanship." Xylek paused, his voice lowering. "But I believe it was something else, something not made of metal at all." He turned his many eyes to Eli, "The will of its bearer." The crowd rose to their feet. Some cheered, some thumped their chests, others simply watched in silence. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that meant respect. When Eli finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't fight to prove humans are better," he said. "I fought because I had to, because sometimes you don't get to pick the size of the fight, you just pick whether you stand or not." He looked at the crowd, at all the faces from 100 different worlds. "Steel isn't magic, it's just fire and work and time. But the hands that shape it, the hearts behind it, that's what makes it strong. That's what makes us strong." The hall was silent again, but this time, it was the kind of silence that hums like the moment before lightning strikes. Then slowly, Relthar stepped forward and placed his four-fingered hand on Eli's shoulder. "You are the only opponent I've ever lost to," he said, "and the only one I hope to face again." Laughter broke the tension, and the hall filled with warmth. Later that night, Eli returned to the observation dome. The stars spread endlessly before him, millions of tiny lights flickering in the black. The academy floated among them, silent and eternal. He sat alone, the broken sword resting across his knees. Outside the glass, a comet streaked past, a silver line cutting through the dark. He thought about Earth, about the blue skies and green fields, about the forge and the sound of his uncle's laugh, about how far he'd come and how small he still was in this vast, glittering galaxy. But small didn't mean weak. He touched the cracked blade and whispered, "We showed them, Uncle. We showed them what humans are made of." For a long time he sat in silence. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and looked out into the stars one last time. There was work ahead, more training, more challenges, maybe more fights, but he no longer felt alone. Somewhere out there, someone would hear the story of the human who brought a sword of steel to a world of plasma. And maybe, just maybe, they would find courage in it. The Academy archives would later record the duel in official words and sterile language, but cadets retold it differently. Around mess tables, in training barracks, and whispered before battle, they told it like a legend. There was a boy from a tiny world at the edge of the stars. He fought with a sword made by hand, not machine. They laughed at him until they saw him fight. And when the fight was over, no one laughed again. Over time, that story left the Academy. It spread to fleets, colonies, and stations. It found its way into the hearts of soldiers who were afraid, of settlers who felt small, of children who dreamed of reaching the stars. They called it the human lesson. And in every version, one truth remained the same. Humans might break. They might bleed. But they never stop fighting. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the galaxy.